Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. This is Pete Gilfillan at IMN, and I'd like to thank you for joining us for our next panel discussion on hotel receiverships, key considerations for owners, servicers, and lenders. We've got a really fantastic group of experts lined up to address this topic, so I'd like to thank them all for joining us. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items before I introduce Chad, who will be moderating this session. First of all, we would encourage you all to submit questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And while the Q&A will be through Zoom directly, you'll also notice that the Hub platform is still open in your original browser tab. So you can communicate and chat with other attendees on this session using the chat function within the Hub page. And lastly, also within Hub, you'll see maybe in about 15 minutes time, an evaluation section will appear in the Hub page, and you can use this to evaluate the panel and leave comments on the topics and what topics you'd like to see discussed in this area at future events. I think that covers it. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand things over to Chad Sorensen, who's the COO at CHM Warnick. He's going to be leading us through this discussion. So thanks very much, Chad.
Great, thank you, Pete. Appreciate it. So good morning and welcome to the Hotel Receiverships session, key considerations for owners, servicers, and lenders. As Pete mentioned, my name is Chad Sorensen. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of CHM Warnick. We're a full-service hotel asset management and advisory firm, and I'll be moderating today's panel. So I'm joined by a group of highly accomplished experts, starting with Daniel Lesser. Dan is the President and CEO of LW Hospitality Advisors. He's got over 40 years of specialized experience in the hospitality industry, servicing corporate, institutional, municipalities, and individual clients in all facets of hospitality real estate. Next, we have Mary Jo Heston. Mary Jo is a U.S. bankruptcy judge who previously practiced as a commercial attorney with a focus on restructuring, workouts, Chapter 11s, and receiverships. We have Mark LeBlanc, who's a hospitality industry veteran, who's Executive Vice President of Development for Aimbridge Hospitality and is leading their new platform, Aimbridge's Recovery Services, which they call ARS. And Kevin Simone, he's a 25-year CMBS special servicer veteran. He's a director at Citus AMC, which is a full-service real estate servicing company. All right, well, let's get started. I thought it would be helpful to maybe start with some of the fundamentals related to receivership. There's a lot of different forms and fashions based on jurisdiction, et cetera. So, Mary Jo, can you provide a brief overview of the different types of receiverships, kind of the roles of receivers, and what dictates the differences in receiverships?
Well, receivership is a creature of state law, and depending on where you are, there can be significant differences from one state to the next. When I was in practice, I practiced primarily in Oregon and Washington, and Washington has always had a receivership statute, general receivership statute, which I use the terminology custodial receivership, which I think of as a receivership that is in aid of a foreclosure process, versus a general receivership where a receiver will be able to, for example, sell the business. But one of the big differences that existed, for example, between Oregon and Washington for many years was that in Washington, in the general receivership statute, you could actually sell assets free and clear of liens. And that's a huge advantage of using a receivership, much like a bankruptcy. And Washington's general receivership, in other words, the type of receivership that wasn't in aid of a foreclosure, but is more to operate the business and try and maximize value through a liquidation, is really almost has many features of a bankruptcy. And Oregon had the worst receivership statute around until they modeled their receivership statute on Washington in terms of general receivership. So I think it's important to understand, what the limitations are before under your respective state law before you evaluate, or in order to evaluate what's the best type of remedy to take.
Great, thanks, Mary Jo. That's a good background for jumping off point here. Dan, maybe you can share a little bit about qualifications of a successful receiver in the hospitality space, which is hotels are a much different animal than other sectors of lodging and real estate.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. So it is interesting. It's not a very high bar in terms of being qualified to be considered to be a receiver. Obviously, you can't have any conflicts in terms of any of the parties that are involved. But generally speaking, aside from New York State, where there's a certification process, there really are, no specific qualifications. You would think that there should be, but frankly, there aren't. And I've actually been involved in situations where both parties in a matter went to the court and asked that I be named as receiver. And we don't need to get into specific details about where and what, but the court said, no, I have somebody better. Turns out it was an attorney down the block who ran the judge's re-election campaign, solo practitioner who handled estates and wills for senior citizens. And this gentleman was appointed receiver of a 400-room branded hotel. So that kind of gives you a little bit of background of what the qualifications are.
Yeah, I think you said it right with the low bar. Even needing to be certified in New York, it's a pretty simple process. Doesn't take a whole lot to be certified. So Kevin, as a special servicer from your perspective, what qualifications, what matter, and how do you view that?
Well, looking at receivers, we're always looking for the most skilled individual, and it doesn't mean that they're based in that jurisdiction. We often bring in a receiver from California to do a receivership in Nebraska if there isn't good trained staff in the area. We've not had a lot of pushback on the court on this because it's really the lender's decision. And it's our peril, it's our cash collateral. So we find that bringing in the best receiver we can from whatever jurisdiction is, for us, one of the benefits.
I would just like to add that there are some states where it's required that the receiver be a resident of that state. Texas and Ohio come to mind.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. Yeah, and a good receiver, obviously, Kevin, can make make your life easier. So let's talk about receiverships, versus a bankruptcy, the pros and cons, and what needs to be considered when thinking about a receivership over a bankruptcy or vice versa. Kevin, you want to weigh in on that?
Sure. I think the biggest advantage of a receivership versus a bankruptcy is timing and costs. We're finding with a bankruptcy, there's so many court hearings and requirements before the judge, and the dockets are full that bankruptcies are moving quite slowly, where receiverships, especially if we can come in with a stipulated receivership order, we can be in and out of the court in a very timely manner. So timeliness is a big advantage of a receivership versus a bankruptcy. The other would be costs. Again, we're appearing before the judge less. We have less hearings, less motions to be filed. The costs are significantly less. So with fewer hearings, legal costs are lower and the timing is faster. So we definitely appreciate the expedited manner of a receivership.
Yeah, some pretty compelling reasons. Mary Jo, do you want to weigh in from your perspective as a judge and kind of what it means to the system with receiverships versus bankruptcy?
Sure. I mean, certainly when I was representing lenders, I always preferred receivership over bankruptcy, not only for the reasons that, well, particularly the cost reason. I think that was usually one of the larger reasons. The other reason is, although usually by the time you hit a formalized process, hopefully you've reviewed your security interests, but there's always in a bankruptcy, there's a creditor committee that is always looking for ways to monetize payments to unsecured creditors. And so you don't have that in a receivership case. So certainly when you have a stipulated process, borrower that's cooperative and no kind of loud creditor constituency that you can't control without court proceedings, a receivership is usually better, again, depending on the nature of the law that you're having to deal with. It's interesting that Kevin indicated timeliness because at least out here in the Pacific Northwest, we have no problem. In fact, we're much faster than the state courts right now, particularly because they're tied up with backed up trials, criminal and civil. So I can get things done very fast. So I think it depends on where you are. If you're in one of the larger jurisdictions that has a lot of Chapter 11s, that may slow your process down. The other thing I'd note, I have a couple of externs that I had look at sampling in bankruptcy cases of pending hotels. And again, the ability to sell free and clear of liens is a real advantage if you have a quick sale in a bankruptcy and your state receivership law doesn't provide for a sale free and clear of liens, which would expedite the sale. And finally, I would just note that there's a new type of Chapter 11 that is supposed to be more streamlined and seems to be much more streamlined. It, unfortunately, it has a maximum debt limit of $7.5 million. So it's only for smaller cases, but a number of the bankruptcies pending, particularly for sales that we looked at in preparation for this program, or that subchapter 5, which moves a lot faster on the theory that the faster you move, the less cost it's going to be.
Interesting. That's a pretty low number. So let's circle back a little bit on the qualifications conversation, Kevin. When you look at hotels, what are some of the unique attributes of hotel receiverships that that are always on your radar screen, and you have to deal with differently than you would other sectors of commercial real estate?
Sure, Chad. A hotel is a very unique beast in itself, and some of the different unique characteristics I've identified are, it's a 24/7 operation. We've got constantly guests at the hotel. Every day there's something going on. It's not like a retail property where the lights come on in the morning and off at the evening. It's 24/7. Receiverships can be subject to franchise agreements and management agreements, subject to SNDAs. So we're dealing with other third parties that are interested in the property. They include the operation of sub-businesses. The receiver is running not only the hotel, but they're running restaurants, spas, retails, parking, etc. The rent's reset on a daily basis. You're basically constantly renting out the building. It requires, among other things, constant marketing efforts. And then finally, what we're seeing now is a lot of hotels that are subject to union collective bargaining agreements. So in these situations, what Dan mentioned earlier about being if the receiver is a friend of the judge who maybe doesn't have good experience, you're going to have a difficulty facing these unique characteristics, because you need somebody who's schooled and well experienced that can handle these different characteristics of the hotel.
Yeah, really good points. Mark or Dan, anything additional to add?
Mark, I'll let you weigh in.
Yeah, I think particularly what you're mentioning on unions, it is a pretty unique situation there. There's so many laws that govern it. You know, we have 1,400 locations in every state and almost every community, but certainly working in cities like New York, which has been a huge problem. We've got roughly 19 properties we manage in New York, and 12 of them haven't even reopened yet. And because frankly, it's cheaper to keep them closed than open them with the unions in them. So that's a pretty unique situation with the unions. We're not afraid of doing it. We do it, but it is a different animal than taking something over in Oklahoma, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how all this plays out in these primary markets with strong unions. Dan, do we miss anything?
No, I think Kevin and Mark really hit the nail on the head. I mean, at the end of the day, hotels are, no doubt about it, very different animals and very unlike other forms of commercial real estate, right? With technology being what it is today, the pricing of guest rooms literally changes by the nanosecond, right? In an upmarket, that's a beautiful thing. In a down market, it'll kill you, just like what's happened this past year. You know, high fixed costs, high labor costs. I guess coming back to the point earlier about the low bar for qualifications, I'm in the middle of handling a receivership on a portfolio of 48 assets around the country. And when I stop and consider that if there was a receiver who is not savvy in hotels handling this, I don't know how they could possibly get it done, quite frankly.
Yeah, that's a lot of assets. Let's shift the direction of the discussion a little bit and get some perspective on opportunities and risk for investors at this stage in the recovery cycle. So Dan, I know you did a similar panel 6 months ago or so. Where does the industry stand now related to receiverships and bankruptcy compared to where it was 6 months ago? And where do you think this is going in 21 and into 22 related to the number of receiverships and bankruptcies?
That's a great question. We're actually not seeing that many bankruptcies. There was lots of talk early on about the tidal wave that was coming. Let's face it, lenders don't want to take non-performing hotel assets back. So they're doing everything they can to, combination of kicking the can down the street and a workout, what have you. We are seeing a pickup in receivership opportunities. There's no question about it. We're handling, in addition to this portfolio, a couple of one-offs, but frankly, not seeing the flood that I, for one, was expecting. I do believe that as time goes on, we are going to see more and more of these. The pain is continuing to grow, and if you think about it, even once COVID is in the rearview mirror, right, the runway will have been exhausted for so many sponsors. So just because people start traveling again and hotels start becoming more active, doesn't mean that the challenges of servicing debt is automatically resolved.
Yeah, if I could expand on Dan's point, during the recession, we did about 200 receivership assignments. And the big difference then is, we could tighten the expenses and get these things to cash flow without debt service. Now, many of them, we can't get the cash flow with no debt service or come even close. So the lenders they do not want them back. Nobody wants to feed these things. So it is a completely different atmosphere than it was during the recession.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, I don't think any of us saw, the past 6 months. I think we all anticipated a lot more bankruptcies and receiverships, but the can certainly does continue to get kicked down the road. But relationships are are really starting to be stressed. So I think we're going to see more activity.
You know, when the pandemic hit, and I think up until frankly now, I think everybody's been trying to play nicely in the sandbox, right? At some point, that's going to end, and the sharp elbows are going to come out.
Yep, I completely agree with that, Dan.
One thing I noticed in reviewing the cases that I reviewed, whereas I think I mean, this is across the board, not just for hotels, the wave of, to the extent there was a wave of bankruptcies that happened last year were primarily companies that were in trouble pre-pandemic. In reviewing the hotel cases that we reviewed, in terms of the more recent filings, a couple of which are in this jurisdiction, it appears that they're at least citing to COVID as being more the reason. And it's interesting because the lenders appear to be working with them, to Dan's point, at least insofar as getting the use of cash receivables to operate in a budget and the like. I think two things will drive an increase in bankruptcies, at least, or receiverships, but one is if the lenders start taking action to foreclose. And two is if you're in an upswing, because the theory is, at least for bankruptcy, is you want to file it, if you're a borrower, you want to file at the bottom and when you're on the uptick, because bankruptcy doesn't create cash. And if you're kind of on that upswing, then there might be more financing available than there currently is now.
Yeah, that's good input, Mary Jo. So interesting question from in the Q&A, asking the group to kind of opine on the courts today, and are they currently more sensitive given the pandemic as a reason to deny lenders' request for the appointment of a receiver? Are you seeing a different behavior from the courts?
I would say no. We're definitely coming before the judge with our best arguments and our positions, and we've been getting our remedies. So I think in some cases there's been maybe a cautionary periods of time given to make sure before the decision is made, but I think we're ultimately getting the remedies we are requesting.
Are most of your cases, though, where the borrower's in agreement with you?
And it's 50-50. In some cases, we've got a stipulated receivership, and those basically are somewhat of a walkthrough. But in other cases where we've presented the facts without the borrower's consent, we basically have seen the court give us our remedies.
And your loan documents have a provision for appointment of a receiver, I'm assuming.
Yes, they do. These are, well, if you want to call them 2.0 documents, they're more current documents.
So, Mark, let's pivot a bit here and kind of talk about hotel performance and looking into the future. So obviously the pandemic led to the worst year that the industry has ever had. We're all still reeling from that. But, as you look at the future and rethink hotel operations, as a company as big as Aimbridge, is there a silver lining from any of this that you guys think you can capitalize on?
Yeah, I think there's lots of silver linings. One thing is, this has been the maximum stress test for our industry, without a doubt, as you mentioned, since the recession, or the Great Depression, rather. We haven't seen occupancies this low. So it's an incredible test for us. But what we have found operationally is that, we can create some efficiency through technology. I think a lot of this was on its way anyway, and it just got accelerated. Things as simple as mobile check-in. Pre-pandemic, only about 20% of the people were using it when it was available. Now that number is probably close to 50, and I think it's going to go even higher than that as it continues. And then things like a touchless room, where there's more voice activation, I think is definitely going to be a thing of the future. I've been saying for a long time, and I think robotics are going to come into play. We started using robots to do room service in LA several years ago, and I think that's going to expand. I think people like it. And then just from staffing efficiencies, you know, I think one thing, our managers are a lot better because they have been the staff in some cases in the last few months. And so they've created a new appreciation for the line level staff employee. So I think there's going to be efficiencies. Anecdotally, we have some hotels, one in Los Angeles, in fact, that during the pandemic, we've run some of the best percentages on our bottom line than we ever have. Not the best dollar amount, but the best percentage, because they got rid of bellman, they got rid of daily housekeeping services, those kind of things. Now, when that comes back and pandemic's not there, will people want it? I don't know. I'm actually in Orlando at a hotel today. I've been here for 5 days. They are doing only cleaning the room on request. And so as a consumer, I'd like to see that come back after the pandemic, but there's some people that say, you know, this isn't so bad not having somebody come in your room every day.
Yeah, it certainly is going to be interesting. You know, a lot of cross training and a lot of managers, supervisors doing line level work to get through this period. Yeah, we're really interesting to see what's sustainable and what bad habits the industry goes back to. So like the $1 million question out there is, you know, where are the best investment opportunities? So let's do a little speculating. You know, Dan, where do you think the greatest opportunity is, you know, today and in the next 12 to 24 months?
Well, when it comes to investment, I tend to be very, and frankly, investment in anything, I tend to be very contrarian oriented. And quite frankly, at this juncture, I like the former darling markets, which are now the dogs, you know, the 24/7 downtown urban locations, you know, like New York. I did say New York, San Francisco, you know, Boston, right? These markets are highly challenged right now. I also like, I mean, I haven't seen any opportunities bubble up, but I think we will, big box convention hotels. Again, this is all very counterintuitive. You know, I don't think the notion of urbanization is going away. It's been around for a long time. You know, 3 steps forward and 1 back is still 2 steps forward, right? People want to live in downtown urban environments where they can live, work, and play. And I strongly believe that will come back. I strongly believe New York will come back. It's going to take a period of time. I don't know how long. You know, frankly, if New York doesn't come back, I think that's a kind of a sorry state of affairs for the world. It's going to come back. There's no question about it. So again, I like 24/7 downtown locations, and I like big box hotels because if and when they become available, I believe they're going to be available at fractions of replacement cost.
Yeah, I agree. And I think
let's face it, every investment, right? It really doesn't matter what you're investing in. It's all about what's your basis, right? So at the right basis, everything makes sense.
To Dan's point, you know, we always say you make your money at the time you purchase it, not at the time you sell it. So it is about basis. But where I think the big discounts are going to be, the top 25 markets, you know, you have Portland, Houston, New York are the 3 worst. They've been hit the hardest. But where we're seeing, at least today, huge discounts are in markets, in the tertiary, secondary markets that people typically don't want to play in. So things like Eau Claire, Wisconsin, 100% of the hotels there are delinquent in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. A few of those secondary markets. Now, the big institutional guys won't go there probably. So that's where you're probably going to see the biggest discount. But, you know, I kind of have a theory. I'd rather have, you know, a great property at a fair price than a fair property at a great price. And to do that, you're probably going to go to New York. And like Dan said, I think there's going to be good discounts there. I don't know we're going to hit the numbers everybody thinks they are. I mean, for example, we track a lot of hotels in markets like San Jose, San Francisco that have been hard hit are only discounting at about 20% to 2019 values today. And every capital partner that calls me wants a 40% discount. And I don't think you're going to find those, not yet anyway, in the top 25 or very little.
The reality is that there is so much money awash in the world, chasing yield, focused in the targeted to the United States, drilling down further commercial real estate in the US, and drilling down even further hotels, because it's been proven time and again that on a risk-adjusted basis, if purchased at market, and if need be, it can be held onto for 7 to 10 years, hotels provide superior risk-adjusted returns.
Yeah.
And invariably, I think when good opportunities become available with all the capital that's out there, those opportunities that have compelling stories to them will get bid up, and we will see distressed transactions, but not necessarily all representing distressed pricing.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's what we're seeing last year with the few transactions that were out there. I think you're spot on there, Dan. So thinking about investors and the impact, buying a hotel or lender taking one back in this pandemic environment, what new liabilities should they be thinking about that have been created over this past year? And we talked about the union, you've got FF&E reserves that have been rated, how they get funded again. Mark, what are your thoughts on that? People should be thinking about that's different this go around.
Yeah, frankly, I know you were going to ask that question. I'm not really sure. There's so many issues out there and I'm based in California, which is always a lot more sensitive to associate issues and those kind of things. So we're kind of, we're doing our very best to protect everybody, and I think that's their number one concern. We're doing our best to comply with, all the union regulations. But I think beyond the pandemic, the bigger risk is what happened pre-pandemic, and that is when you had local cities creating new regulations, such as Oakland's Long Beach, on work rules and that. And frankly, I think that's going to have a much bigger impact than the pandemic has 2 years from now, and how it's pushing costs up there. And that's why I think some kind of using technology to reduce labor and control it and monitor it is going to be essential. And if you're not doing that, you're probably not going to improve your NOIs as you come out of this.
It's interesting. This is the second time Mark has appropriately brought up technology. And, when you look back at the hotel sector, unfortunately, the hotel industry has always been, vis-a-vis technology, very reactive and not all that proactive. Mark mentioned the notion of touchless check-in and keyless entry, right? If you think about it, those phenomenon have been available for quite some time, and they've been historically reserved for elite members of frequent traveler programs, right? They were not rolled out to everybody. Now it's going to be rolled out to everybody, right? I believe it's a new Marriott brand standard that by July 1st, every hotel in the system has to have, keyless entry available. It is quite remarkable. Like I said a moment ago, the reactive versus proactive. I'm hoping, and I do believe that now with the pandemic, the sector is going to realize that they need to be more proactive as opposed to reactive. And a classic example of that would be, in my mind, the notion of online travel agents, which came into the fore during the Great Recession. And, the hotel sector was hurting, no different than it is today. And when that came around, lots of folks thought that was the greatest thing since Swiss cheese and embraced it wholeheartedly. Well, we all know what happened and how that came back to bite the sector and the struggle that's gone on since in terms of control of the guest, right? That's a classic example in my mind of being reactive instead of proactive. And then to add insult to injury, the sector took a stab at developing its own online travel agency with roomkey.com, which was a colossal failure.
Yeah, to expand on the technology, just real quick, because I know we're running out of time, there's a hotel in Japan called the Hanana. It has 270 robots when it opened. 6 years ago now, they had 270 robots. They were supposedly the first hotel that was free of human labor. They've laid off half the robots because of technological problems, so they're finding that they still need people, but I think it's only a matter of time that we get closer to that. And I think the other thing, and this is probably a whole different workshop here, is, you know, the Z travelers, the Z generation, they don't really need to have a chocolate on their pillow, and they like to be alone together with people. So I think you're going to find they embrace a hotel that's run by technology a lot quicker than the boomers do. And so it's going to be very interesting next 5 years. I think the pandemic is going to accelerate a lot of these things, and it's going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. Yes, we're a few minutes left here. I think another question that we've all been asking ourselves is we watch the difference kind of in behavior from a balance sheet lender and then the CMBS market. Kevin, some perspective on the CMBS in current deals and how that's going to ultimately shake out. Right now, there's not a lot of movement. There ultimately has to be, and then what does it look like long term for CMBS in the hotel sector?
Yes, CMBS, if you looked at the delinquency rates a year ago versus 6 months ago and versus current, there's definitely been a change in the market. Especially hotels are in the worst classification. I think it was STR that noted that this is the worst time for hotels ever in its history, even worse than the 2009 recession. What we're looking at here is hotels that the delinquency rate has gone down just a bit from where it was 6 months ago. But I think we're seeing that there's a lot of modifications that were completed that have come to fruition or expired, and they are ticking up the delinquency rate a bit. So we're looking here at a situation where the delinquency is high. It looks like it's ticking down a little bit, but our concerns are some of the initial indicators are showing that we may be having an uptick again by the amount of delinquent first month delinquencies that are ticking up again. So it looks like we're out of the woods, but it looks like the woods are coming back into sight again.
Interesting, really interesting. So we've got 1 minute left here. I'll just do a quick closing comment from each of you, if you wouldn't mind, piece of advice that you would give to the audience. Mary Jo, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, I guess from the lender's perspective, I think, that in terms of whatever plans that they have relative to their borrowers, they need to be mindful of when a financing becomes available, because I think that makes, as I indicated earlier, it more likely that a borrower is going to resist a receivership versus a bankruptcy, because in a bankruptcy you can cram down a lender in terms of value, and if you're on the upswing, there's a distinct advantage of a bankruptcy over receivership. So, I think that as those factors change, the lenders need to decide if they're willing on the particular borrower to provide new money versus so they have some control over the future.
Good point. Mark?
Yeah, I think two things real quick. I think is if there was a hotel you liked in 2019 and it's only at a 20% discount today, buy it. It's probably never going to go down to that 40%. And then the second thing is make sure your management company is thinking after COVID, what are they going to do to improve the bottom line? And as I've said several times, if they don't have a technology platform, you probably should look for a new company.
Yeah, good advice. Kevin, from your perspective?
Definitely. Looking as a lender at loans coming to a crashing end, we need to look at capitalization. The inevitable is receiverships or bankruptcy, but if you're able to bring in new fresh capital to recapitalize, that would definitely be something that the lender can't get through a foreclosure of the real estate. So definitely, if you're looking at negotiating, keep your capital ready, be willing to deploy capital as necessary to save your deal, because I think lenders are going to be looking for that additional co-investment back into the deal together with terms that the lender can provide. So I think that's something owners should consider when considering receiverships or bankruptcies in the future.
Yeah, it'll almost be a mandate. I agree. Dan, you want to take us home with your perspective before we hand it off to Pete?
Sure. Thank you. I would say keep praying, and if you haven't started, start. Obviously, that's for existing owners. If you think about it, everybody's loss, and there have been and will continue to be losses, ends up being somebody else's gain, right? So there is and will continue to be tremendous opportunity in the sector. To Mark's point, for compelling opportunities, if you're looking at dramatic discounts, good luck. You'll be kicking tires and not actually buying anything. And my closing thought is, and I've been of this opinion for frankly forever, and I think the sector really needs to embrace the notion of underwriting hotel investments on a long-term basis. Hotels are fundamentally long-term holds, and the notion of going into a deal underwriting a 3 to 5 year hold. Listen, lots of folks have made lots of money doing that, but it's a dicey proposition, right? Think about any transaction that closed November, December, and then January, February, right, prior to the pandemic. If they underwrote under a 3 to 5 year premise, that's going to be a tough conclusion. However, if you underwrite for a 7 to 10 year hold, right, and be prepared to hold for that long, if need be, I'm convinced that if you buy at market, it's kind of tough to lose money. So if there's one theme that, again, I would emphasize, going into transactions, be prepared if need be to hold on to a hotel investment for, frankly, 10 years. That does not mean that if a capital event opportunity bubbles up in year 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, to bake in some significant gains, that you wouldn't do that. I mean, sure, you might very well do that. But again, just think about anybody that closed on a deal, December prior to the pandemic, right? You better hold on for 10 years if you want to, try to come out whole.
Yeah, so we're good to hear a little optimism in today's panel. So Mark, Mary Jo, Kevin, Dan, great conversation. Very much appreciate you participating, and I will hand it off to Pete to wrap it up. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Chad. I hope everyone found the discussion to be of value. I know I certainly did. So I would like to once again thank Chad, Mark, Mary Jo, Dan, and Kevin for the work they put into this and for sharing with us their time and their expertise today.